Welcome back to Redhead Takes. Who do you think of when you think of all-time NFL power running backs? Jim Brown, John Riggins, Derrick Henry? Well, today we're talking about, in my opinion, my personal favorite of those old style power running backs, and we have Earl Campbell, who is one of the best of all time, and sadly his injuries kept up to him, and his career definitely could have gone longer if he wasn't so injured by the end of his career. Now, Earl Campbell, 78, number one overall draft pick coming out of Texas. He had an amazing career there, and he was a Heisman Trophy winner. Didn't win a national championship at all, but came close. But was a great player nonetheless. Nicknamed the Tyler Rose because he came out of Tyler, Texas. 5'11", 232 pounds. He was a load. You could not get him down, and he just bull rushed through. Also, to mention that he had one of the best 3-year stretches beginner career that you'll ever see. I mean, this guy broke the mold. Starting out, of course, in 78. Now, in order for him to be, or for the Houston Oilers to draft him at number one, they had to make a trade. They traded him for the first round pick, Jimmy Giles, a tight end, a first and a second in the 78 draft, and a third and a fifth in the 79 draft. Now, thinking about back then, that was a lot of capital to give up, but it was well worth it because you got a Hall of Fame running back out of it. Sadly, Houston never won anything, as we will find out, but they were close a couple times. We have his first season, 78, 15 games played, 14 games started, 302 rushing attempts for 1,415 yards. Man, what a great rookie season. Starting with 13 touchdowns and an 81-yard long yards average yards per game, around 96.7, so almost 100 yards. Yards per attempt, 4.8, which is a great number. I mean, you talk about today how the average in the NFL, I believe for the average running back in the NFL is about 4. He almost averaged about 5 yards per carry, which was unheard of in that day. He had 9 fumbles, however, but by the end of the year, he was a Pro Bowler, All-Pro number 1 at running back, second in MVP voting, Offensive Player of the Year, and as Offensive Rookie of the Year as well. And they lost in the championship game to the Miami Dolphins. I'm sorry, I wrote that wrong. They lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who, of course, will go on to win the Super Bowl. I got that wrong. Next we have 79. 16 games started, 16 games played, 368 attempts, 1,697 rushing yards for 19 touchdowns and a long of 61 yards. Man, again, what a great year. He's already, after 2 years in the league, he has over 3,000 career rushing yards, which is fantastic. 106.7 yards per game, 4.6 yards per carry, so a little bit of a dip, but not too much. 8 fumbles overall, and what do you know? Pro Bowl, AP number 1, MVP of that year, All-Pro or Offensive Player of the Year, and they lost to the Steelers. Now, sadly, their season just ended poorly. I mean, they only put up like 13 points, and with that steel curtain defense, he could not get past that. I mean, they just manhandled Earl all day long, and after such a great season for him to end up so poorly in the game, it just kind of sucks. He certainly did have a great year, and he was well worthy of the MVP, but it just sucks how Houston got so close. But again, the Steelers and their steroids won out. Yes, I know no one wants to talk about, but the Steelers had rampant steroid use during the 70s, during the Steel Curtain era. Important to note. Next we have 80. 15 games played, 15 games started, 373 attempts for 1,934 yards. Man, another 60 yards or so, and he would have broken O.J. Simpson's uh, year record total for rushing yards at the time. But sadly, he did not make that. But he still had 13 touchdowns. He had 55-yard long and 128.9 yards per game. Man, damn, that is like Saquon Barkley numbers this year. I think Saquon Barkley this year had around that kind of clip, around 130 yards per game. Man, but this was back in the era where defenses could be defenses. Defenses could hit the quarterback. Defenses could hit the running back. They could hit anybody, and they were just fast as hell, and they were really scary. And he just blew them out, and he had a 5.2 yards per carry. Again, that is fantastic. Again, brought his fumble total down to 4, and what do you know? Once again, Pro Bowl, AP All-Pro number 1, second in the MVP voting. Yes, he was close to getting it back-to-back. Offensive Player of the Year, and again, losing to the Steelers, who would eventually go on to win the Super Bowl. Now, I was wrong before. They did not lose to Miami in 78. I believe they lost to the Raiders, who would go on to win the Super Bowl that year. But again, Earl Campbell had a great 3-year stretch. Like I said, at the end of the 1980 season, they would go on to have nearly 5,000 yards after 3 years. That's amazing. That's unheard of, especially in today's game. Could you imagine if you had Earl Campbell at his style today? He would still do pretty well. Now, of course, Derrick Henry is the modern evolution of the Earl Campbell, I think, and not just because they both played for the Oilers / Titans, but man, he was great, and he could have been great in this time. Now, bit of a down year next year in 81. Well, still a good year overall. 16 games started, 16 game plays, 361 yards attempt, 1,376 yards total, 10 touchdowns, 43-yard long, and his yards per game went down to 86. So again, a bit of a dip, but he was still, and like I said, down to 3.8 yards per carry, which is his lowest at the time, and his fumble total went back to 10. But he was still Pro Bowler, just not All-Pro this year. And again, Houston didn't make the playoffs. That 3-year stretch, like I was saying, in his first 3 years, the Steelers went to the AFC Championships twice, and they lost once in the wild card round. And man, again, it was a great 3-year run, but after this, Houston started to take a tumble. Well, basically, Houston would not make the playoffs after the 1980 season till 1987, I believe. But it was still a good year, nonetheless. Then, a bit of a dip. Another dip. 9 games started. 9 games played in 82. 157 attempts for 538 yards. An injury year for sure. Only 2 touchdowns, 22-yard long, 58.8 yards a game, and 3.4 yards a carry, and only 2 fumbles. So, no Pro Bowl this year, injury-riddled year, but still was able to get some good carries out there. But again, Houston was not good. They were not close to the playoffs. And sad to say, Earl Campbell just didn't have a great year. His first really bad year, after 4 truly great years, it was his first bad year. But he was rejuvenated in 83 with 14 games started, 14 games played, 322 attempts. I think he missed 2 games this year, so 1,301 yards total, 12 touchdowns, 42-yard long, 92 yards a game. Again, getting back up to where he normally was, and 4 yards per carry, only 4 fumbles. So again, He made the Pro Bowl this year again. No more All Pro. He won All Pro first 3 years of his career. Never won it again. But sadly, 82 was his last truly, or 83 was his truly last great year, because then his last 2 years were a bit of a fuck, to be honest. Then you get to 84. His first 6 games, he played 6 games, started 6 games, 96 attempts for 270 yards for 4 touchdowns, 22-yard long, 46.3 yards per game, and 2.9 yards per carry. Yeah, not a great year, and 2 fumbles. At this point, they were traded to the New Orleans Saints, who for the number 1 pick, and New Orleans ended up selecting Richard Johnson, who had a decent career in New Orleans overall, but again, probably not what you would think of as a number 1 selection, at least for the impact that it gave. And at the time, New Orleans had another Heisman Trophy winner, George Johnson, I believe. If I'm getting that name right, I'm sorry if I got that name right, got my history wrong, but at that time, New Orleans had 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Didn't do them any good. They didn't make the playoffs. And then when he played for New Orleans, 8 games played, no starts, 50 yards, 50 attempts for 190 yards, no touchdowns. And again, it's not great numbers for his first half a year in New Orleans. Then we get to his final year of his career. 16 games played, 12 games started, 150 yard attempts, 643 yards total, 1 touchdown, 45-yard long, and 40.2 yards a game, and only 4.1 yards per carry, which was still good for the time, and 4 fumbles. So, again, sad way to end his career. At this point, the injuries had piled up, and while he probably could have played another year and gotten to 10,000 yards total, he felt that the injuries were too much, and he decided to retire. Now, of course, he would later go on to be invited into the NFL Hall of Fame in 1991, I believe, and the rest is history. He's one of the best running backs of all time, one of the best power running backs of all time. I forgot to mention, at the time, when he was drafted number 1 overall by Houston, he got a 6-year contract for $1.4 million. Man, at that time, that was huge. That was huge. But now look at the contracts of today, or players that get at the number 1 overall selection are getting paid millions and millions of dollars, not to mention sponsors and everything else. I mean, times sure have changed since the late 70s when Earl Campbell was selected by the Houston Oilers, but he would go down as one of the best players of his team, best players in the NFL, one of the best power running backs of all time. He would go on to become a state hero of Texas. I mean, literally, the state legislature in Texas recognized him as a state hero. The only other 3 people that were named state heroes are, of course, Stephen F. Austin, pretty huge, Sam Houston, pretty huge, and Davy fucking Crockett. Yeah. Earl Campbell was put up there with the names of those 3 special men, both great in our nation's history, and as well as the great state of Texas as well. Now, later on in life, he's developed several health problems, arthritis in his hands, spinal stenosis, so now he can't really walk that well, so he uses a cane, moves around in a wheelchair at times, but he's still seen as a hero in Texas. He's done a number of charities, he's opened businesses in Texas, he's seen as an icon in the state, and he's well worth it. He's a great person, and he is also a great player as well. Important to note, this is maybe it's kind of a silver lining, but all 3 years where he played, all 3 seasons ended playing against the eventual Super Bowl champion. So I don't think it makes you feel any better if you're a Houston Oilers fan or Tennessee Titans fan, but it is something. You played your best ball, but you lost to the team that would eventually go on to win it all. Now, the Tennessee Titans tried to induct him into their Ring of Honor, but he declined because, of course, it was right to decline because he never played for the Titans. I know the Titans have tried to bring in the Houston Oilers. Like, yeah, these are all-time greats. It's like, but they didn't play for the Houston Oilers, or they didn't play for the Tennessee Titans. Warren Moon did not play for the Tennessee Titans. Earl Campbell did not play for the Tennessee Titans. Of course, Bruce Matthews did, but he was also another great. Which at some point I would like to do a video on Bruce Matthews as well. But again, it's important to remember Earl Campbell was one of the greats, one of the best. I mean, you can see his highlights on YouTube. I wasn't gonna put him in this video. Like I always say, my point in making these videos is to show the history and let you make your qualitative assessment on your own. But again, watch his stats. He was just a load. I mean, he was bowling people over. His jersey was being pulled off and it was still standing on his feet. He was truly great, and it's important to recognize that he was a great person as well as a great player. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. There will be a poll, as always, after, or for who I should select next to do an NFL career video on. But Earl Campbell, all-time great. Let me know what you think. Have a great day, and as always, God bless.